We are in the holiday season. If you could believe it, it seemed like it just jumped on us all of a sudden. And I know for a lot of you, especially if you have young kids, they're very excited, idea of Christmas coming up. But for a lot of people, this is not a very joyous time of year. As a matter of fact, I've read that during the holiday season, there's more alcohol abuse, more domestic violence, robbery, depression, all kind of things that people have to deal with during the holiday season. And for some folks, it is a blue Christmas that they have to deal with. As a matter of fact, Dr. Ken Duckworth, the medical director of the National Alliance on Mental Illness, he said this. This is Mr. Duckworth, good-looking guy. He goes, I think a lot of people would say that the holidays are the worst time of the year. They're just straight up miserable. And that's not only for people with clinical depression. And it's a possibility there might be some of you here this morning that feel that exact same way. Like, oh, here we go again, you know. You don't say it, but it's, bah humbug. Here we go. We got a holiday season again. And there's a number of reasons why you might feel that way. And I'm going to give you just 5 of them this morning and see if one of them fit with you just a little bit. First some people have a struggle with the holiday season because of bad memories. Maybe your experiences of Christmas past were not exactly the way that you thought they would be. Maybe you didn't ever get that present that you always asked Santa Claus for, and you wondered why your neighbor always got it, but you never got it. And so you've got these memories of how Christmas used to be. Maybe a part of that is also, it was time when, Dad really tied on one and would always get drunk, and then Mom would always cry and be stressed out. And so there might be a lot of reasons that come to your mind when you think about the holiday season. Maybe your parents always just made you get up and go to grandma's house. You hate to go to grandma's house, you want to stay and play with your toys, and there's a lot of reasons. So maybe it's just some bad memories that you've got, and this time of year it brings those things back out. Number 4 might be this, overcommitment. If you feel that way, young mothers especially, you got your PTO meetings you got to go to, you got the school Christmas activities or winter holidays, you can't call Christmas in schools anymore, or you got these other things you got to do, maybe at church you got kids play, or it could be a number of things, parties, office parties to go to, neighborhood parties to go to, and it's like, oh my goodness, this holiday, I can't fit it all in, and so you've overcommitted yourself, and it brings just an extra stress in your life. The third one might be this, financial pressure. You want to provide a really good Christmas for your children. And every commercial that comes on, it's got the latest gadget and thing, and your child wants all these things, and you don't want them to not have things when other kids have things, and so there's the financial pressure to buy these things. But tied in with that is a little bit of depression because come the end of January, that bill's going to come due. And so there's a financial pressure. Number 2 might be this, the empty chair. Some of you might experience that this year for the very first time. That holidays for you was always about family and those that you cared for. And this year there's going to be an empty chair. Maybe a death, or maybe a divorce, or maybe a child that's in the military and is overseas, or for a number of reasons, but that chair's empty there. And maybe this year you're single for the first time in a long time. Or maybe you've never been married and you're like, it's just a reminder of me, of my singleness, and you don't like it. Could be, number 1, could be unrealistic expectations. I don't know how it is your house, but my house for the last couple of weeks has been nothing but Hallmark Channel Christmas movies already, and I'll be honest with you, I love Christmas. I've not watched one of them yet, but now that Thanksgiving's over with, maybe I'll sit down with the wife and daughter and watch some of them. But you watch these movies and the Hallmark, cards you get in the mail, and Christmas is all warm and fuzzy, and everybody's sitting around the table, and you're eating the turkey that's beautifully basted, and it's just a wonderful time of love and joy, and the snow is gently cascading down from the skies, and it's just that Christmas spirit, and you just can't seem to grasp that Christmas spirit. And I don't know about you, but that kind of serenity in the Christmas scene doesn't happen in my house very often, which being in Florida, we don't get a whole lot of snow anyway, but it could be a myriad of reasons of why Christmas to you is not exactly the way that you always think it should be. So what are you anticipating for Christmas? What are you looking for when it comes to Christmas? Well, this morning we're going to begin a series of messages as we lead up to Christmas, where we're going to look at Christmas through the eyes of the people that experience Christmas for the very first time. And maybe we can catch a few clues as to how Christmas should be for us as we look through the eyes of different people. This morning we're going to look through, to me, it's one of the most fascinating aspects of this Christmas drama. And it's by a caravan of people that traveled hundreds of miles to that very first Christmas. We call them the Magi. And they are a very interesting group of people. And I'll let you know right off to begin with that these Magi, what we think about them and what is the reality is quite a bit different. As a matter of fact, we get most of our idea of the Magi out of Christmas songs than we do about actual historical, biblical information about the Magi. First of all, they were not kings. We get that from the hymn. Even if you're not going to church much, you've probably been to the mall and heard, we three kings. Nowhere in the scriptures or history that says that they're kings. Nowhere does it says there are only three of them, just like this thing here. We get that from the gifts, the gold, the incense, and the myrrh. And so we just assume there's three of them. Matter of fact, there probably was a caravan of people. What we do know about these individuals is they might not have been kings, but we do know from history that these Magi were advisors to the kings. As a matter of fact, they were considered by many people as the king makers. The word Magi is, we believe, came from Persia or Babylon, modern-day Iraq. The word Magi comes from the Greek word Magi, which is a certain set of Persian priests. They were educated in science and astronomy and astrology and different religions, and they were considered some of the wisest people in the ancient world. And so they were a select group of these priests that were the advisors to royalty. We know that they studied stars, which a lot of the ancient pagan world did, looking for what their influence on humanity and all of that. But we also know that they believed in the God of the Jewish people, which is kind of interesting. And we know that they were searching for the newborn Jewish king, of course, scripturally. So the things that we do know about them, and the things that are, that have been kind of added on through the years, we do know this, is that the idea of what they were looking for that first Christmas and the reality of it did not exactly mesh up. Things were not exactly as they had envisioned when they set out on that journey. But the one thing that we can discover is that as we begin to read about what happened when these Magi showed up, is there's not one hint of any kind of disappointment in what they found. So this morning I want for us to look through the eyes of the Magi, and hopefully it'll give us a different perspective on what to look for this holiday season now that we're just now getting into it. And one of the first things we can learn is this, is that the Magi, they saw that their source of hope was from God. It was their understanding of what they had been told, and we're going to talk about that in just a little bit, about this coming of this Messiah. So they had hope. Now, their kind of hope is different than the kind of hope that we normally have today. I was thinking this past week of all the trends and the fads in the last number of years, and there's always the hottest toy that the kids have got to have that you just hardly ever can find. Do you remember when Cabbage Patch Kids were the thing? Everybody had to have a Cabbage Patch Kid. And then there was Tickle Me Elmo. Do you remember that? And you could not find a Tickle Me Elmo. And it just goes from one thing to another. I had my nephew a number of years ago. He got into the wrestling thing, and he just had to have the John Cena, the wrestler, doll. I'm sorry, the action figure. Boys don't play with dolls. And so I went all over this town to every Walmart and Target and everything. Target is what we call it in our family. It sounds more fancy than Target. And I went everywhere to find this John Cena action figure because my nephew wanted to have that. Never found it. I'm sure he's emotionally scarred for the rest of his life because he didn't get his, that's what we think. We got to have these things. And of course today it might be your, an iPad or a laptop or whatever. But when we say hope today, we have it kind of like I hope it doesn't rain tomorrow. That's our kind of idea of hope. It may or it may not happen. I just hope. And we like hope because hope is what brings a little bit of anticipation of the future. It's hope that can make, when it seems like life is going in the wrong direction, it gives you a little bit something to live for. So hope is very important to us. But when it comes to biblical hope, it's a little bit different than it is with the regular kind of hope. One way this can be illustrated, this is what the Apostle Paul said about those who give their lives to Christ. And the book of Colossians, Paul said this. Did I put that in there? Is Colossians, did I miss that? 1:17. There it is. Christ in you, the hope of glory. It's not the idea of Christ maybe, being glory in your life. It's a confident expectation. And these wise men, when they set out from probably modern day Iraq, Babylon, to find this Christ child, it wasn't a wish. That's what our kind of hope is. We kind of wish something. They had a confident expectation, and the best kind of hope is a hope that is anchored in certainty. Isn't that the kind of hope you want? The best kind of hope is the hope that is anchored in certainty. And the hope that we have today in this holiday season, and the hope that the wise men, the Magi, had, was found in Christ. So when we follow Christ, if we follow Christ, our confidence in life, and guidance in life, and protection in life, and provision in life, and care for anything that goes on in our life is found in Christ. And it's not a wish, it's not a hope as we look at it, but it's a confident expectation. And when the Magi came in Matthew chapter 2, I'm sorry, I'm the one that got out of sorts here. Matthew chapter 2, verse 1. Let's back up just a little bit. It says this, "And after Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea during the time of King Herod," you're going to learn some things about King Herod that maybe you didn't want to know when you came here this morning. "And Magi from the east came to Jerusalem, and they asked, 'We kind of think there was somebody born. We wish there was somebody was born. We kind of really hope that there was a guy.'" When we've traveled hundreds of miles, we've traveled thousands of miles on horseback and camels to get here. So we kind of hope that there was this born king. No, that's not what they asked. They said, "Where is he? Where is he? We know he's been born." We have absolute confidence that he's been born. God said he was going to be born. He sent a star, as a sign. We were looking for it. They said, "Where is this one who's been born King of the Jews? We saw his star in the east." And we were curious. No, they weren't coming because they were curious. We have come to worship him. That's the key. That's one of the things. If you want this Christmas to be as perfect as Christmas could possibly be, is to have the idea that Christmas is about Christ and worship of Christ. Any other thing that you bring to this holiday season, as good as these other things might be, you've got your focus on the wrong thing. It's all about Christ. So how did these Gentile Magi come to know that there was to be a king that was to be born way over in this little dirty part of the world of Judea in Bethlehem? Well, there was a guy that was captured when Babylon came in and took over Jerusalem over 500 years before. And this guy was taken into captivity way over there by the guy of the name of Daniel. If you go back in the Old Testament, you'll find that there's a book that's been named after him. And so Daniel was a strong believer in God. As a matter of fact, God made him one of his prophets. And so God revealed to Daniel through an angel. This angel was named Gabriel. So this angel comes to Daniel and says, "Look, about 483, it's the only place in the Old Testament that gives a specific time. There are hundreds of prophecies about the coming of the Messiah. Daniel's the only one that had a timetable. And he said, once there is a decree that's been issued about the rebuilding of Jerusalem, 483 years from that point, this Messiah is going to be born. And 483 years later, this very same Gabriel that spoke to Daniel spoke to this young woman, Mary. Gabriel said to Daniel, there's coming a child, Messiah, is going to be born. 483 years, this very same Gabriel shows up. He talks to a young girl by the name of Mary and says, "Mary, you are going to give birth to this Messiah." The fascinating thing about all of this is that these Magi and Daniel, if you go back and you look at the Hebrew language, he was considered one of these Magi. He apparently shared this vision with all the other guys, and he was raised to an exalted position within the empire there of the Babylonians. Apparently he shared this with the other guys, the other Magi, and for all these generations, for these over almost 500 years, they passed on what Daniel had said. And there's this little obscure passage back in the book of Numbers where it talks about out of Judah will come this star. Who would have known that it was a literal star that he was going to talk about? So for all these centuries, these Magi had passed on what Daniel had said. There's coming a Messiah. And then what we call March the 5th, 444 BC, the Persians took over the Babylonians. A Persian king by the name of Artaxerxes sent out a decree that Jerusalem was going to be rebuilt. And so you got these Magi like, okay, here's the decree. Let's start tracking it. And so we have these Gentile people that believed in God's word that tracked it for 483 years. And then when they saw that star, they knew that it was it. They believed God's word. Something else that we can see through the eyes of the Magi or this as we think about it is the Magi saw that worship comes through determination. And sometimes you've just got to be absolutely determined when it comes to your relationship with Christ. And if you're leaning on other people, I've seen through the years of 30 years I've been doing ministry work, sometimes I've seen children that have had greater devotion and commitment to Jesus Christ than their parents. I've seen that over and over again. And it was there, and they were determined without any parental support. Now, of course, it helps a whole lot more when you got mom and dad that are on board, but they're just determined. And for some of you, you're going to find that there are many people that don't understand why you live like you do and do what you do. And maybe you face ridicule sometimes at work or if you're in school or other places, and and it's a struggle and it takes determination. And when it comes to the holiday season, sometimes we've got to be determined that we don't let all of the stuff that goes around with the holiday season, as good as it is, be a roadblock to following Christ. Listen to what it says in the scriptures. It says, and when King Herod heard this, he was disturbed. And he was a disturbed man. We'll understand. He had been disturbed for a long time. And all of Jerusalem with him. And when he had called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of law, these Jewish scholars, he asked them where the Christ was to be born. They knew exactly. These Jewish scholars that lived there in Jerusalem, they knew exactly where he was to be born because this is a prophecy from Micah several hundred years before, right around the same time that Daniel got his prophecy. And so they quoted Micah. Well, in Bethlehem in Judea, they replied, for this is what is written by the prophet, who was Micah. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you will come a ruler who will be the shepherd of my people Israel. Yeah, Herod, we know, about 5 miles south of here, that little sleepy town of Bethlehem, the town called the house of bread is what Bethlehem means. That's where Messiah, that's where he's going to be born. Got any other questions, King? Not, could it be? Not, could it be? We'll travel with these guys. No, that's it, King. See you later. We're going back to bed. But these Magi, possibly up to 2 years, they had been planning and traveling. 2 years of their time away possibly from home, 2 years of possibly away from loved ones, 2 years of hardship, 2 years of traveling expenses, 2 years of maybe living out of a suitcase. I would say that they were very determined to see the Christ child. And they didn't come. The Magi didn't come to Herod and say, "Hey, guy, King, you know who we're very important. You can tell by the clothes that we wear and the entourage we have. We're important people. I know that you're glad that we're here. It's been a long journey. We're very tired. We just want to hang out here tonight. Let us crash here in your palace. God will bless you real good if you do that." And we don't find that coming off the lips of the Magi. They want to know where the Christ. There's no time for chit chat. There's no time to talk about the political situation between the Persian Empire and Judea at that time. No, they wanted to see this Christ child. They were determined to see the Christ child. Well, let's talk about Mr. Herod just for a minute. Herod, and first of all, Herod is a title more than it is a name of this individual. When Rome took over Palestine in 63 BC, about 7 decades before Christ was born, there was this group of rulers called the Herodians that were set up by Rome to kind of keep control over Judea. And the third ruler down the line, once they established that in 63 BC, was the Herod of the biblical narrative. And this guy was unbending, he was cunning, he was crazy, he had an insatiable ambition. Good things happened under his reign. The temple was rebuilt, some amphitheaters were built, some great buildings were built, but also as time went by, he became more and more insecure in his position as the king of that area. He was appointed to be the king of the Jews by the Roman Senate in 40 BC, AD, BC. So he was not actually born to be a king. He was not even a full-blooded Jew. And any time that he was threatened, he took immediate action. Here's just some of the things this sweet little Herod did. He killed 3 of his own sons because he thought they were a threat to his throne. He killed his favorite wife. I can't imagine what would have been one of his unfavorite wives, but he killed his favorite wife because of some threat. He killed his mother-in-law. Some of you probably can say, what's wrong with, Nah. Not me, of course. Absolutely not me, but some others. He killed his brother-in-law. He killed his uncle. And he killed 300 court officials near him when he felt threatened. So that's sweet Herod for you. And so you can imagine when these people connected to royalty show up with this large entourage, everybody saw coming to Jerusalem. They were probably on horses, not the camels, and all the supplies were probably on the camels. There's probably servants that went to take care of these high-ranking officials. There were probably a number of maybe soldiers, because when you have the kind of treasure they had to protect that as well. So there's probably a very large entourage shows up in Jerusalem. Jerusalem is murmuring and whispering on why this group is here. And then the thing that disturbs everybody the most is the question that they ask: where is this king that was born, this king of the Jews? They knew that Herod would be disturbed, and once Herod was disturbed and troubled, they knew it was going to mean trouble for everybody. But these men were determined to find a Christ child. They had done the math. They were looking for the coming of the king. And they were not going to let anything keep them from worshiping. The religious Jewish people that should have known better, that had the scriptures, seemed to be spiritually dead, while we find these Magi that were spiritually determined, that were willing to travel hundreds of miles through difficult circumstances, probably horseback through the rugged eastern mountains of what is modern-day Iraq, to get on the main roadway, desert roadway, then switch to horses to travel hundreds of miles at great expense to find the Christ child. It was not a quick trip. It was demanding. The other thing that we can see is that the Magi saw that Jesus' birth, it was a time of celebration. Jesus' birth was a time of celebration. Matthew chapter 2, verse 9. Let's listen to what it says here. And after they heard the king, found out exactly, I guess they had the Daniel prophecy, but they didn't have the Micah prophecy. They weren't Jewish, so they didn't have it all, but they had enough. And so then after they had heard the king, they went on their way, and the star that they had seen in the east went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. And when they saw the star, they were overjoyed. Not just happy, they kind of had some joy. They were overjoyed. You know what overjoyed? When you're over something, that means you're really exceedingly happy. I think I would have been happy too. If I'd have traveled possibly close to 2 years to find somebody, I think I'd have been happy too. And it said, on coming to the house, not to the nativity. I know one of those things. I know that your house, you've probably got your nativity with Joseph and Mary and baby Jesus in the manger and the cow and the lamb, and then you got the shepherds and you have the Magi there. And I don't want you to go home and change it, but they were not at the nativity. The scriptures are very clear. It's at the house. And there's a difference between the manger and a house. So now they were renting a house somewhere in Jerusalem. And then when they saw the child, I don't mean to mess up your Christmas, but the word is very clear here, not the infant. There's a word for infant that's used in the New Testament that uses the word child, which means a little toddler. And so this is where we get the clue that Jesus was not a baby when they showed up with these gifts. They were apparently living in Jerusalem. Jesus was a toddler. I'm not saying that he was 2 years old, but another clue that we'll find out later is that Herod, when he was threatened by it, he had all the children in the area that were how old? 2 years and younger, massacred. And so, Jesus could have been 1 year old, but he wanted to make sure he covered that. But when they saw the child with his mother Mary, they were overjoyed. Again, that very same word, that child, it says it twice in the narrative. They were overjoyed. And they saw the star that had pointed them to the promised one. I don't know if you've got a Christmas tree up in your house. We've got one up, shocked the world. But if you have a star on your Christmas tree, which we do, my tree has a star. My wife has an angel, but I've got the star. Let it be a reminder that those that came that first Christmas, these Magi, they were determined. They were determined to see the Christ child. And so they followed that star. Let it be a reminder to us of our determination that there was nothing, no personality like a Herod, no circumstances like crowded inns that we're going to talk about. Not any of these things are going to keep us from what Christmas is all about. And we're not going to lose our joy because it's not going to be based on circumstances. And the problem is this time of year, we can get kind of gripey if we're not careful. I just can't believe this traffic. Did you see the crowd at the mall? I could not even find a parking place. It's not even December the 1st, and I'm so sick and tired of hearing those Salvation Army bells at the stores because it makes me want to scream. There's just too much going on. This time of year, I believe, is a time for joy. Maybe even overjoy, as we've got the focus that God would have us to have. So in the marvel of the season, with all the trappings that come with Christmas, let's remember that God came to earth as a baby. Some of you folks my age and older remember Harry Reasoner. Do you remember? Anybody here remember Harry Reasoner? Remember he had on 60 Minutes, he was one of the main broadcasters. And he wrote something, and he died back in the 1980s. He said something at the end of one of the programs that would never pass today. But this is what he said in the midst of the holiday season. He said, this is the basis of the tremendous burst of buying things and gift giving and parties and near hysteria. He said, in the midst of it is a quiet should be event, the first Christmas that we believe actually happened a long time ago. You can say that in all societies there have always been winter festivals, a midwinter festival, and that many of the trappings of our Christmas are almost violently pagan. But you come back to the central fact of the day, the birth of God on the earth. So this holiday season, you can come cynically. It's just a materialistic time of year, where businesses, are able to get in the black. Or you can come graciously, and many of even that are unbelievers can say, you know what, there's a lot of goodwill, a lot of good things that happens during the holiday season. Or if you want to choose to come as a believer, you come with reverence. Because this is the anniversary that the God of the universe in the form of a helpless baby came to us. For God so loved the world, he sent his son. Well, how did they celebrate their joy? Well, the Bible tells us in Matthew chapter 2, verse 11, they bowed down and they worshiped him. This royalty, these guys that are advisors of the king, they come to this toddler, maybe a 1-year-old, and they bow down and they worship. Well, how did they worship? First of all, they opened their treasures and they presented him with gifts of gold, of incense, and of myrrh. They began to give. And that's what worship is all about. You give. You give of yourself. You give of what God has blessed you. And so they come to this Christ child. And for all these hundreds of miles, they carry these very expensive gifts to lay at the feet of the Christ child. And they begin to worship. Let me tell you what the perfect gift to give to God this morning. And it's this. Paul said in Romans chapter 12, verse 1, offer, give your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and pleasing to God. This is what makes God happy. This is your spiritual act of worship. Isn't that what we should do as we start this holiday season? Kneel beside the manger and worship. Don't let the unfulfilled expectations of what you hope to get. Don't let just the idea of getting the right kind of food. Don't let the pretty lights. Don't let all these things be the determination of whether and how much you want to worship Christ. Because if you put on these other things, you probably will be disappointed. But Christmas can be perfect if you see it through the eyes of the Magi. God knew exactly what we needed. If we needed information, God would have sent an educator. If we would have needed financial advice, God would have sent an economist. If we would have needed entertainment, God would have sent an entertainer. But God knew that the greatest gift that we needed, was the gift of salvation. I read the story of a mother that got overwhelmed with life. And so one day she just left the husband and the kids. And the husband knew that just taking off after her immediately was not what was needed. But he did call her on her cell phone and told her, said, honey, please come home. Said, I need you, the kids need you, we love you, we miss you. And she would answer the phone, but she just wouldn't say anything. And he would call her again, honey, I miss you, please come home. And said sometimes he could just hear her crying in the background just a little bit. And finally, after some time had gone by, he decided to hire a private investigator to find out where his wife had gone. And he had discovered that she was at this seedy little motel in Las Vegas and just holed up there. And so the husband decided it was time to go. And it was Christmas Eve, as a matter of fact. And he softly knocked on the door, and his wife was just sitting on the lumpy bed in the dark, very dimly lit. Room smelt kind of moldy, you know how some of those old motels can be. And he began to knock a little bit harder and a little bit harder. And finally, the young woman got up off her bed, and she peeked beside the curtains to see who it was. And when she saw it was her husband, as quickly as she could, she took the chain off the door. She unlocked it, and she just threw herself into the arms of her husband. And as quickly as she could, she gathered up her belongings, the few that she took with her, and they got in the car and headed back home. Husband didn't say anything. A couple of weeks went by, and kids were back in school. The Christmas tree was back in the attic. It was just them two sitting in the kitchen drinking a cup of coffee, and the husband finally had to ask her, said, honey, why did you take so long? I begged you 100 times to come home. What took so long? And this was her response. She said, you had told me that you loved me. You told me that you needed me. But those were just words until you came. 2,000 years ago, the God of the universe traveled through the heavens and came to this third planet from the sun, and he showed up. He did more than just say, I love you. He came. He came for you. That is what Christmas is all about. And how we respond makes all the difference in the world on how much we get out of this holiday season. Christ came to Bethlehem, and the Magi saw it. The other religious people didn't. The Magi saw it, and they came and they worshiped.